Hey guys, and welcome to today's YouTube video. Today we're going to talk about my color grading workflow in Premiere Pro. I'm just going to show you everything on one example, what I usually do when I'm color grading my footage. Let's dive straight into Premiere Pro and let's get it done. So the first step in my color grading process is that I'm opening the color tab, and from here you can see all the tabs that are very important. So it's the Lumetri color tab. Then on the left side, I open up the Lumetri scopes. So I have the waveform, the RGB curve, and the vector scopes. So the first step that I'm doing when I'm color grading my footage is that I create an adjustment layer in 4K because I shot this in 4K. And I drag it onto the third layer and I just leave one layer free in the middle. I'm going to show you after that why that's important. So first of all, I shot this footage at Banjarmanchigan last year in October. And I shot it in S-Log3 in SCAM with 3 Cine. This is important because the first step in my color grading process is that I convert my footage from a log picture profile to a Rec 709. And I'm doing this with the Sony conversion LUTs. They are available on the website. You can just download them for free. And I'm going to use the SCAM with 3 Cine S-Log3 to Rec 709 conversion. And just like that, with one press of a button, my footage is back to a Rec 709 color space. I see more details and colors. And if you press here on the eye, you can just toggle it on and toggle it off. So this is very easy. This is not really a step in color grading. So now let's get to the next step. In my next step, I usually press on the footage in general, and I'm trying to adjust my white balance. So I just make this a little bit bigger. And here you can see in the RGB curves that I have a little bit more reds and greens than blues. So what I'm trying to do, I add a little bit of magenta to have just a tiny bit. If you press on Command, then you can just roll to the side, which gives you much more detail or much more control over your wheels. So most of the time they just go a little bit too far. So now you can see that I have a little bit magenta in the highlights, and I just go back and dial it in that it looks good. You can always just press on this FX to see a little before and after. As you can see, this was very greenish and now it's a little bit better. Now the next that I'm gonna do, I decrease the temperature just a little bit. Now it looks pretty good to start with, in my opinion. You could also just use the white balance picker to just press on it and it automatically adjusts your color temperature. But most of the time I'm trying to make it manually. And yes, so just let's go back to what I did. And yes, so this is my first step always in my color grading process, to just adjust the white balance. And then also I'm trying to go first of all into my basic correction, which means exposure, contrast, highlights, and shadows. And in this particular case, you can see it here in the waveform. I have definitely a little bit more room to play with my highlights, and I also can dial back the shadows quite a bit. So what I'm gonna do now is I increase my highlights just a little bit more, but what you always want to make sure is that it's never touching the 100 line, because this means that it's clipping. So I'm going to try to go as much or as high as possible, but not too high, because you can see the sky definitely doesn't have a lot of information. It looks pretty white. So I'm dialing it back a bit. And also for the shadows, I just want to add a little bit more pop and contrast. So I usually just decrease the shadows a tiny bit, as you can see now. And sometimes I increase or decrease, depending on the look that I'm after, the contrast a little bit. But here I'm very happy with the contrast. I just want to lift the shadows just a tiny bit because I think it was too dark. And for that I increased the contrast a bit. So let's just now the before and after that we have so far in the color grading. You can see the highlights definitely pop more, and it's just a little bit more saturated, and in my opinion it looks pretty good, a pretty good foundation to start with. So the next step when it actually comes to color grading is that I add another adjustment layer in between my clip and the Rec 709 conversion, so on layer number 2, and this is where I start my actually color grading process. So in the first step I usually add one of my creative LUTs that I have here in the drop down menu. But in this particular case right now, I'm just going to grade the footage without any LUT to show you like all the different aspects of color grading and to have a better overview of what I'm actually doing. So let's go straight into curves. And into curves, you can see here hue versus saturation. This means you can pick a hue and then you can increase or decrease the saturation. You always set three points, and then you can play with the saturation like can see in this case, here you have hue versus hue. So you can, for example, choose the greens, and you can, yeah, just change the hue of the greens. And hue versus luma is you can select a hue and then you can change the luma, so the brightness of this particular color or this particular color space. So for now, I'm just leaving it like this. And what I usually do in my color grading process is that first of all, I'm gonna decrease the greens a little bit, because Sony and also DJI footage, in my opinion, is like definitely oversaturated and I don't really like this. So I'm gonna decrease it just a little bit. So here the tick, you can see the before and after. I decrease it a little bit. Then what I also like to do is I wanna warm up the greens a little bit. So I push them a little bit more into the orange. So as you can see it here, it's a little bit more into the orange, makes it a little bit of a warmer feel, which I usually like. Then the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to the hue versus luma, and also here I make the greens a little bit darker, just a tiny bit, not too much. And the good thing here about this footage is that I shot it in S-Log3, and FX3 has a 10-bit color depth, so this means I have a lot of flexibility when I'm color grading. So if you're shooting on 8-bit, make sure to not push and pull the sliders too far, because it could easily lead to that your data footage just falls apart, and we definitely want to avoid this. So for now, I'm happy with it. Here you can see like I only adjusted the greens just a tiny bit, but this is fine for me. I just made it a little bit warmer, and I really like this for now. So next thing I'm gonna do, I'm going into color wheels and match. And what I usually like to do is I wanna put a little bit of blues into the shadows. As you can see when you turn this here, in all the shadows you add the specific color that you're pushing the slider to. So I wanna add a little bit of blue, obviously not that much. If you double press on it, it just goes back to normal. I wanna add a little bit of blue, but not too much. And on the same side, I wanna just make it a little bit darker. The shadow's just a little bit darker. And then it's just about trial and error, just finding out what you actually like. So I'm happy. I'm pushing it a little bit more to the teal. It's not too bluish, but a little bit more teal. Make this a little bit darker. So this is for the shadows. So as you can see, it's like very blue in the shadows, but to have more warmth and more color also in my midtones, I'm just gonna push the midtones back to a little bit more, of a warmer vibe, to the orange. So into the oranges, then you can see this brought us here. And for the highlights, I then like to make them a little bit cooler, which also adds like a nice, kind of a teal and orange like vibe to it. So as you can see it here, this is what we did so far. If I zoom in, I see that it's a little bit greenish in the highlights. So I'm just gonna try to put this a little bit more into the blues, also the magenta, just not too much, because tiny adjustments here can definitely make can have a big impact on your color grade. So this is the grade so far. I'm just gonna go back, and this is what we have so far. Now I'm gonna go into the curves tab, and what I also like to do is I set 3 points most of the time at the shadows, then the midtones and the highlands, and I try to make my shadows a little bit darker and lift the blacks just a little bit. This creates a tiny fade in the shadows, and I'm gonna push my highlights a little bit more, and I'm also gonna lift my midtones a little bit more. So in the next step, I'm just gonna go back to the to all my colors. For me, I think that the greens are still a little bit too saturated, so I dial it back even more. And I also think now that it's like a little bit too warm. So I'm gonna try this back. Here you can see it's very, very cool. It goes like very, very into oversaturated greens, which I absolutely don't like. I think everybody's gonna agree on that. So I'm gonna go here and just start it in like this. So this looks very good. let's just see a little before and after. This is how the footage was before we graded it, before we adjusted all the colors, and this is now after. And I think I can still increase the blues and the shadows a little bit to add a little bit more color contrast. So I'm gonna do this now. Give it a little bit more of a cooler vibe in the shadows. I increase the midtones just a tiny bit. And this looks very good in my opinion. So far this looks very good. And this was all without a LUT, as I said. So if we're gonna take a little look now on how we've come so far. So this was more or less how we started. This was our white balance correction and all the basics. Then we have the LUT and then the Rec. 709. To see it even better, we're just gonna do it now like this. So first of all, I'm gonna toggle out the LUT or the grading of the actual colors that I did. And here the basics. So I just, in my first step, I adjusted the white balance and the basics like this. This brought us here. And then the next step I adjusted like shadows, midtones, the color of it, some of the hue versus hue, especially in the greens. And this brought us here. In the next step, what I also like to do is to work a little bit with masks. So I'm just gonna add a new Lumetri color tab. So I go into my effects controls. This is the layer that I just added. As you can see, no difference. The first layer is the grading that I did so far. I like to add a little bit of I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller. A bit smaller, you can actually see it. I wanna increase the highlights on this side a little bit more of this farmer to just add a little bit more of contrast into my entire shot. So, but for this, I just create this mask. I increase the feather and the mask extension a little bit. Now I can go back that you can actually see it. And now the only thing that's going to be affected is this mask. So if I push and pull the exposure, for example, the shadows, it's only going to be affected in this mask of the Lumetri color tab. So now I can just increase the highlights a little bit more. I'm gonna also increase the contrast and the shadows. That just gives everything a little bit more pop. And I'm gonna add not a lot of warmth, just a little bit warmth to it. Just gives a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more contrast. It's actually a little bit too much highlights, that's for sure. So just a little bit. It's not a lot, but it can definitely help to give even more contrast to your shot. So in the next step, I want to add a little bit more contrast also. I want to darken the shadows a little bit more in this area because I want to have more focus on this farmer. So add another Lumetri color tab. And then I'm going to quickly zoom out. With this drawer, I can draw my own mask however I want it. I just draw here that it's like in this area. Then I increase the feather and the mask extension a little bit, drop it more in here. And now I can decrease the exposure a little bit. I can decrease the shadows and also the highlights. It just adds more attention on the farmer and not, on the areas that are not important. And I'm also gonna add a little bit more blues to the shadows. Not too much, just like that. So I think it looks pretty decent so far, and I'm just gonna show you a little before and after of everything that we did so far. I'm just gonna cut all the layers in the middle. Then I'm gonna delete this Lumetri color tab. I'm gonna delete this adjustment layer and also this adjustment layer. So these are now all deleted. And now we can see like, this is where we came from before we touched anything of the Lumetri color tabs or anything. And this is where we are now. I could, as I'm seeing it now, I could definitely decrease the contrast a little bit. It's a little bit too much in my opinion now. So I'm gonna do this now. I'm gonna decrease was the wrong one. I'm gonna go back into my colors. And I'm going to decrease the contrast just a little bit to make it a little bit more of a softer vibe. Just going to increase the highlights a little bit more. And yeah. So let's take a look at it again. This was before, this is after. And yeah, so far I'm pretty happy with it. I'm gonna show you also the before and after when we compare it to the after the Rec 709 conversion, because most of the times obviously is a big difference when you just see the flat log picture profile. But so I'm gonna just drag the Rec 709 conversion a little bit further. So this was before we did anything, just the Rec 709 conversion, and this is the grade that we did. And yeah, I gotta say I'm pretty happy with it. I could maybe decrease the magenta a little bit because it's a little bit too strong. And yeah, this is where it's at. This is the grade. I'm pretty happy with it. It looks, yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. And I leave it like this. So yeah, to sum it all up, what's important in the color grading process is that, or in my color grading workflow, is that I create this adjustment layer to do only the Rec 709 conversion, as you can see here. Then after that, I'm gonna do the basic corrections with white balance, highlights, shadows, and everything on the clip that I'm using. And after that, I'm gonna dive into the colors. Most of the times I use one of my LUTs, but in this case, I just did everything in the curves. Wait, here we go. Everything in the curves tab, especially on the green tones in this particular case, and in the color grading wheels to, yeah, just add a little bit more contrast, a little bit more colors to each specific part of the image, to the shadows, to the midtones and highlights. And this is basically all. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you liked this video and if it was any helpful. This is just my color grading process, as I said. I hope you learned something out of it and you can apply it for your own edits. And yeah, also let me know if you want to see any other videos, any more color grading tutorials. And thanks for watching it, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. Peace.